Hi class, for this discussion I chose the 2014 article, Subtle Cognitive Deficits in Severe Alcoholics. Do they show a specific profile? The overall aim and purpose of this study was to assess whether or not there were any noticeable cognitive deficits in therapy-resistant patients who succumbed to relapse shortly after hospitalized detoxification and/or withdrawal. The study hypothesized that therapy-resistant patients who experienced at least 5 relapses would suffer from subtle cognitive deficiencies, particularly in frontal executive functions. For those who are not familiar with the term executive function, this is what helps us with things like paying attention, remembering details, managing our time, etc. When our executive function isn't working properly, our behavior becomes less controlled. For this study, there were a total of 22 inpatients and 20 healthy control subjects. Each participant gave informed consent, and the local ethics committee approved the experiment. All patients were diagnosed by a senior psychiatrist as being alcohol dependent based on the International Classification of Diseases criteria, and were clinically examined by an experienced neurologist. Additional criteria consisted of a history of more than 5 years of alcohol consumption and had to have undergone a minimum of 5 withdrawals in the last 5 years. Testing was conducted between days 7 and 21 of withdrawal to assess a standardized population, as well as to represent the critical stage shortly before discharge. Further, the control group was closely matched by age, gender, and education. Neurological tests administered were many. To name some: digit span subset of the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale version 3, 2 classical versions of the trail making test, A and B, Benton facial recognition test, SKT, facially expressed emotional labeling, and a German version of the verbal learning memory test. The MWT-B, a multiple choice vocabulary intelligence test, and the RWT word fluency test containing verbal and phonological fluency with alternating categories were also employed. The Beck's Depression Inventory version 2 was done as a self-questionnaire. Additionally, participants performed a computerized short-term memory model where they were required to memorize 4, 5, or 6 item finger sequence. A go cue was given either immediately or after a 5 to 7 second pause. Subjects had to recall the sequence as quickly and accurately as possible. The results of the study revealed that patients illustrated considerably lower performance in the subsets TMT-A, TMT-B, and RWT when compared with the control group. This indicated a specific frontal executive deficit, which such an impairment would correlate with occurrences of relapse. The patient group also illustrated decreased performance in the Benton test and NWT test. Moreover, patients displayed notably higher levels of subclinical depressive features in the BDI-2. On the other hand, learning direct and delayed memory were not diminished in comparison with the control group. Additionally, there were no distinct effects or divergences revealed between the two groups in terms of the short-term memory model. Both groups did well when there were shorter sequences and when they were required to recall the sequences immediately rather than when delayed. I think the strengths of the study reside in how it can be generalized to the study population. It's relatively simple to analyze, and the data appears fairly consistent and reliable. The weaknesses of this study include there being little related and/or secondary data that is easily accessible to compare this study with, and how the information and statistics are not robust enough to really explicate the complexity of issues present in this study. Further, the study only looked at therapy-resistant patients with overall negative prognosis. Thus, my suggestions to better enhance future studies in relation to severe alcohol-dependent subjects and cognitive deficits is to include those patients who are in recovery and have a relatively positive prognosis. By comparing the two groups with a control group, we may be able to better understand the dynamics of the issue more and come up with a more effective means to help and treat therapy-resistant heavy drinkers. This may also help us to understand why abstinence does not always help with improving cognitive deficiencies in some heavy alcohol consumers. And that concludes my discussion. Thanks for listening.